Hello, everybody, and welcome to, I think we're on, week 13? We're almost wrapping up this semester, and over the next couple weeks, we're going to talk about intimate relationships, friendships, family, and human sexuality. I think it's kind of appropriate given the time of year it is, and it's time to spend time with family and those who are close to us. So it's kind of a timely topic. So this week we're going to talk about things such as human sexuality, gender issues. And then next week, because I don't want too much pressure on your holiday week, we'll do a short section on attraction and intimate relationships. But we'll keep the work a little bit light for next week so everybody can enjoy their holiday week. When you return, we will be finishing up the semester with some lectures and activities centered around abnormal psychology, or usually what we consider mental disorders, or the study of mental disorders, and how those mental disorders can be treated given the right conditions. To start the topic off for this week, it's kind of interesting to think that most universities and most colleges, the topic of gender and sexuality and human sexuality are taught out of the psychology department. In fact, for the past 3-4 years since I've been teaching, I've actually taught human sexuality as part of my course load. And I want you to ask yourself now, why would human sexuality be taught out of the psychology department at a college or university? Because if, high school, it's taught out of your health ed classes, it would fit well in a biology or an anatomy setting, those kinds of things. But at most universities and colleges, if you take a class specifically on human sexuality, it'll be out of your psychology department, more likely than not. And the question is why? And it comes down to a couple factors: that human sexuality is not just a biological health process. Human sexuality deals with culture, it deals with individual relationships. There are psychological aspects of human sexuality, and when we think of it just as a biological process, we miss a lot of the essence of sexuality. And so that's why most of the time you'll see a class such as a full class such as this in the psychology department. Now, for introduction to psychology purposes, we're not going to go into a great amount of detail about human sexuality. It's just going to be an overview. We're going to spend some time talking today about gender and gender issues. Okay? So to start a conversation, we need to make sure that we differentiate the difference between sex and gender. Sex is the assignment given by a physician at the time of birth. So when you were born, your physician looked at you and based on his or her interpretation of your anatomy, either assigned you as male or assigned you as female. And then based on that, you may have, or if in a stereotypical way, probably conformed to those sex roles, which is your gender. Males usually genderize themselves as a man. Females tend to genderize themselves as women. The question is, and this is the way we have conceptualized gender for a very long time in our human history. We have two categories. We have men and we have women. And so how do we approach this in science, though? Because when we start looking at gender and sex, we find that biologically, psychologically, we don't exactly conform to these two categories, that there's a lot of variation between a man and a woman, and we all can lie somewhere between that. So in science, we conceptualize gender on continuums, and we're going to go over a few of these here in just a second. It's important to keep in mind that we're all female at one point in our development as well. If you believe life begins at conceptualization, we are all female until about the 6th to 8th week of development, when our genetics differentiate us to either having external or internal genitalia, which then determines male or female when we're born. But the reality is if conceptualization is the term of biological birth, we were all actually female at one point. I'll come back to that and why that is important here in just a minute, but I want to just look at our traditional societal expectations for gender. So if we look at this graph here, this should look pretty familiar, is that at birth a doctor assigns, usually in a very subjective manner. There are no tests of male or female. It is just a doctor who says male, female based on his or her observation of the individual. So let's go along the male right. So if he's assigned male, he's expected that he will act like a man. A man in our society is expected to be masculine. And men are expected to be attracted to women, or what we call heterosexuality. If we look along the female line, it's the same thing. The doctor assigns you female. You're expected to be a woman who acts feminine and attracted to men. This has kind of been our social and cultural narrative for quite some time now. But it's important to understand that this is not actually a complete story. Now, what I'm about to tell you is not meant to change your mind about men and women. If you feel there are just two categories, men and women, that's okay. This isn't a journey of trying to change minds. The way I would look at this information, though, and that it's important to understand, is even if after this you say, no, there's just men and women, make sure you keep this information to the back of your mind, because whether you're going into business, the helping fields, the health fields, you will run into people or you will interact with people that do not meet your gender expectations of just two categories. And to be successful in life, we have to learn to be able to treat those individuals with respect, dignity, and also for our own success in life, we need to be able to work with the whole array of human experience, not just our preset ideas. So it's okay to maintain your belief about gender. This is not a lesson on trying to change that, but it is important to understand this variation, because you will need to interact with folks who don't meet those gender expectations in a successful way. So let's talk about now the way we can look at gender, and we'll look at sexual orientation as well. We're going to start with sex, because that's our biological anatomy, okay? Individuals with external genitalia are usually classified as male. Individuals with internal genitalia are usually classed as females. And that's kind of how we've done it for quite some time now. The issue is even when we get this classification right based on physical features of the individual, one thing to keep in mind is that if we take a full biological profile of an individual, there are no 100% males and there are no 100% females. According to our biology, we all sit along this continuum. There are males, but also have female hormones and also female tendencies, just like there's females who have male hormones and male tendencies. So the idea of a biological sex isn't really that accurate, because we're all along this continuum somewhere. Often we see in the middle sets an individual we know as what we call intersex. A derogatory term that used to be used for them is hermaphrodite, but that has such negative connotations. It's been changed to the people who study gender issues to intersect. A person who is intersect is someone who has both male and female genitalia. And for these individuals, it's very difficult because often it is left to the physician to classify that child either as male or female without taking into consideration which of the physical organs are going to dominate for that child, or what that child's internal biology is going to determine to whether they're more of a female traded or male traded, at least from a biological perspective. So for a lot of these children, it's very difficult for them to deal with, and their families have a hard time with this. It's definitely something that we need to change. There's a couple states who, when a child is intersect, they will actually wait before determining the child's sex. And I think that's the best course, because when we categorize like that and we get it wrong, it can do a lot of psychological and social harm to the child. So when we talk about sex, it's important to put it on this continuum, because like I said, when we look at the inside of us, our internal biology, there's no such thing as 100% male, and there really is no such thing as 100% female. When we are then determined by our sex or biological anatomy, we then look at our gender identity. And this is the how we feel about our own sex. So if we look on the left-hand side, man usually is assigned as male, so they take on man gender identity as man, and we have woman on the other side associated with female. But again, we see a continuum in between there where everyone can slide along this continuum. So for some examples of those individuals who are in the middle are, for example, transgendered individuals. These are individuals who have been categorized biologically, for example, as male, but they feel internally that they should have been born as a female. And so they identify more with the gender identity of a woman, but they feel trapped because they're in a male body. And we can have it vice versa with women too, born biologically a female, but feel like they should have always been a man, or they feel internally masculine. Two-spirited is a Native American term who for individuals who used to actually have a special place in Native American communities. In fact, they had their own house with special designations on it. And two-spirited was a Native term for individuals who both have male identity or genderness and a female genderness to them. So they had a dual identity where they could build from the strengths of a female and build from the strengths of a male. And these individuals were used to be sought for wisdom on relationships and all those kinds of things. Genderqueer is someone who takes their gender identity kind of to that extreme where they want it expressed to mark their identity within their gender. On the next level, so we have the sex level, and then we have what we identify as, or what we feel about our sex, and then we have what we express as our gender. And again, we have to denote that these can lay on a continuum between masculine and feminine. Masculine traits within our culture tend to be dominating, competitive, strong, all of those strength-based things that we focus on in our culture as man traits or male traits. On the feminine side within our culture is usually someone who is fragile, nurturing, tender, soft. Those would be common descriptives of someone who is feminine. Now again, everybody can be on this continuum. There are times where a man, even though predominantly he might go through his day in a very domineering and competitive way, can have feminine traits, for example, with his kids or with friends and family. So we all lay on this continuum. And once again, we can denote that in the middle there are individuals such as people who are androgynous, and these are people who express neither masculine or feminine traits. They're often individuals who you can't really tell male, female on just by their expression of who they are. So we have expression, and then we have sexual orientation. And kind of the stereotype or the norm, as you could say, in our culture is a child-born male. You're a man, you're masculine, you should be oriented towards women, and on the other side, female women oriented towards men. And as we know, this can be on a continuum too. I should note on the orientation that across the lifespan, when we look at longitudinal studies, everybody's orientation fluctuates throughout the lifespan. We know with men, they become what's called bi-curious for a man who's heterosexual or a gay man. They both will wonder about their opposite orientation sometime during their life. It is similar for women as well. And so sexual orientation actually fluctuates on this continuum. For a lot of individuals within our culture, this brings about a lot of guilt and a lot of shame because our culture says we should have one single sexual orientation. Anything that deviates from that is abnormal. But actually, what is normal is that we do fluctuate on our orientation throughout our life. There are different types of orientation that we can put on this continuum somewhere between attraction man, attraction woman. One is bisexuality. This is often a confused term because a person who is bisexual has a primary sexual orientation, whether it be woman or men, but they can at times have sexual orientations or sexual acts with either the same sex or opposite sex. But they have a primary orientation, but at times they will enjoy sexual acts with a opposite of their orientation. Pansexuals, on the other hand, are individuals who are attracted equally to anyone along that continuum. If you think of the word pan, the derivative of it is panoramic or panoram, meaning that it's all encapsulating. So there's some individuals who are attracted to both men and women and anybody in between. So that's our sexual orientation, and we assume that our orientation equals our behavior, but that's not always true. So we have just another layer of sexual behavior, because just because we're oriented, for example, towards women, doesn't mean that in a certain situation we might have behavior or sexual behaviors with a man. So when we talk about sexual behaviors, we're talking about individuals that will lay across this continuum. Some examples of the difference between orientation and behavior. One is the classical prison story where a man will go into a prison, or a female, and they will have sexual relationships with a man while they're in that prison. That does not make that individual gay. That's not their sexual orientation. It is what's there and that what is available to meet those intimacy and sexual needs. If you go onto Craigslist on their personal ads and look at their casual encounters for men looking for other men, most of those men are straight males. A lot of times they're married, those kinds of things, but they're choosing to have behaviors with other men. Some of these men are not even what would be considered as pansexual or bisexual. So this continuum idea is one way to look at sex, gender, and orientation. And also, the nice thing about this is it shows how we should really split these up, because we know there's difference between expression and behavior, orientation and identity. And so it gives that more complex look at gender and sexual orientation and all those kinds of things. Another way we can look at gender issues is through this basic diagram. So if we look at this diagram and we put you in the middle, we can put orientation, identity, expression, and assignment at birth kind of overlapping with each other, and we could get a picture of you. Now, I'm only going to go over a few of these terminology things. If you have a question about any of the other ones, please let me know on the question forum for this week, and I'd be happy to answer those. But there are a couple that I want to hit on in the sexual orientation section, specifically individuals who are asexual. And the reason why I want to hit these is I want to talk about asexuality and aromantics. Okay, asexuality is a person who lacks sexual desire and sexual motivation. Okay, an aromantic is a person who lacks the desire or the motivation for an intimate relationship. Okay, now before you ask, studies have shown that there is nothing biologically wrong with these people. So try to not to tempt to go that direction. There's no lack of hormones. There's no lack of brain processing. It's just these individuals tend to lack that desire. It is a small population. Estimates range between anywhere between 3 to about 8% of the population can be identified as asexual. There's a growing literature that there is a growing number of people who are considered aromantic. Now remember our orientation thing. It can fluctuate across the lifespan. So during our lifespan, there can be a time during our life where we become asexual for a time period. And a lot of the people in this class probably have experienced that. But there's also people who tend to be asexual dominantly through their entire lifespan. Now, why do I bring these people up? And the main reason is I've had to work with these individuals before because of the social pressures that asexuals face in being feel like they were forced to have sex, that there's something abnormal about them because they don't go and find sexual relationships. On the other hand, there's also the aromantic, where parents and family pressure this individual to enter a relationship which they have no desire for. The issue is that there's nothing wrong with these people. There's nothing wrong with lacking desire for sex, and there's nothing wrong with lacking desire for a romantic relationship if that's the core of who you are. And this is kind of my soapbox moment, because what kind of bothers me about what we do to these individuals is they end up in an office like mine someday with things like suicidal thoughts, thinking there's something wrong with them, thinking that they are the problem in their relationships. And what I would say to you, and I encourage everybody to do this, if you have someone who does not want to be in a romantic relationship, don't tell them they need to be in one, because you are hurting them. If you have a friend who is not sexual, there is nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with them. And we should be ashamed of ourselves for pressuring these people. Trust me, I've had to sit with suicidal students before and suicidal individuals because of this issue. And this is one situation where I will say it's the family's fault, it's the friend's fault, it's the school's fault, if any of these people ever did end up harming themselves. The other thing I want to mention about that line is aromantic and asexual are not synonymous with each other. You can be asexual but still want an intimate relationship. Just as much as you could have no desire for an intimate relationship but have sexual desires. This is important to understand because if you get in a relationship with someone who is asexual, try not to shame them for not desiring you. Okay, that was your choice to get in a relationship with that individual, but then to pressure them to do something that they don't feel, that's on you, not your partner. And the same goes for aromantics. If someone does not want a relationship with you, it may not have anything to do with you. It may have to do with their lack of desire to be in a romantic relationship, and there's nothing wrong with that. So moving on, that's kind of my soapbox moment. Take it for what it's worth, but trust me, you never want to be in the positions that a lot of people have put me in because of their attitude. Gender identity, the term that I want to hit in this category is the cisgender category. Now, this is my interpretation of why cisgender was created. It was created because gender people, the people who study gender issues, recognize that they, in their studies, were actually being biased on their own. Because if you notice, any of these terms does not recognize a lot of heterosexuality or people who believe that the only way to identify is if you're a male, you should be a man who should be masculine, who should be attracted to women, and vice versa, women being attracted to men. And that is their identity. While most of the studies on gender identity has been putting that orientation into the negative light to show that it should not be that way. Well, if you think about that, that is a biased science. We shouldn't do that. And so cisgender was the attempt to take gender bias out of the study of gender. So cisgender recognizes individuals who believe that there is one identity that is conformed to our cultural norm. This allows us then to cross-study these things in a more objective way by giving that orientation a definition and a purpose. That's why I think it's there, and I'm grateful that it was actually added so that we can identify that as an actual gender identity, and it takes a little bit of bias out of gender studies. So this is the end of this lecture. I'm posting another video that's a TED Talk dealing with human sexuality, and then your post will be either to choose to post about gender identity or human sexuality. It'll be your choice this week, especially based on the diagrams of our the makeup of our class, and then there will be another question for the instructor section where you can ask me any question, and I will try and answer it the best of my abilities. So that's it for this lecture. Look at the other videos. Have a good week, and I will be getting your term paper rough drafts to you this week. And get those so you can be working on them with recommendations of getting that finalized. There hasn't been anything in the folders. Don't worry about that. If you don't see anything, I'll try and remember to post that on Moodle. And so let's have a good week, and we will talk to you soon.